As a former FBI agent and chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, I had oversight of all 16 of our nation's intelligence agencies. My name is Mike Rogers. I had access to classified information gathered by our operatives, people who risked everything for the United States and our families. You don't know their faces or their names. You don't know the real stories from the people who lived the fear and the pressure. Until now.
It's not a fear as in petrified. It's more like, make sure you do everything you need to do. And don't have any mistakes or failures be because you didn't take that extra step. You weren't willing to put in the time. Fear of failure is motivating for me. If you fail in a counterintelligence area, it can have national implications. Failure at that level can mean lost lives. It's a very important value to me. Keeping people safe, keeping Americans safe, keeping this country safe. It's my job. It's my job. This is the biggest case that I will ever be responsible for. I had no idea it would end up the massive investigation it ended up being. I'm SSA Jim Gaylord. I supervise the counterintelligence squad in Southern California. We were called to headquarters. They didn't tell us what it was about. Before we could be exposed to the information we were given about this case, we had to be polygraphed. That's never happened to me before, so I knew that the information itself was very sensitive, so they were taking extra steps that I'd never had to take before.
Where did the information come from?
I can't actually tell you how we got the information. I'm not trying to be coy, but we also have to protect our sources. We sat down and we were told that China was stealing U.S. naval secrets. Kevin Moberly is one of the first 3 agents that we had on this case.
It was around 2003 that I joined the FBI, and immediately upon arriving to the squad, it was evident that our #1 threat was China.
Now the FBI is calling for your help in identifying Chinese spies, amid growing evidence that China is now this nation's greatest intelligence threat.
China obviously is a huge country. It's a growing country. It's asserting itself. Most of the information worth having is here in the United States. China is our largest counterintelligence threat, easily. What was clear from the beginning was the technology that was at risk was naval technology.
FBI headquarters asked NCIS headquarters to send an agent to support the investigation, and that happened to be me. The value that we bring to that FBI investigation is that we understand the technology, we understand the Navy platforms. I'm always motivated to protect the Navy's technologies so they have that advantage.
So we learned that there was a leak inside of Power Paragon, which is a subsidiary of L3 Communications, a huge defense contractor. About 95% of their work is U.S. Navy technology, mostly in electronics. The technology that was being leaked to China was Navy destroyer information and submarine information. In the beginning, we didn't know exactly who was the source of the leak at Power Paragon. We'll take a look at a number of factors. We look at travel. We look at access. After we'd sifted through all the information, it came down to one person, and it was Chi-Mak.
Chi-Mak was born in China. He moved to the United States with his wife. He became an engineer in Southern California in the 1980s as an employee of Power Paragon.
Chi-Mak was a very good electrical engineer. He was the go-to guy in Power Paragon.
Chi-Mak had extraordinary access and was highly placed at work. He was trusted by the U.S. government experts. He worked with them side by side.
Chi-Mak worked on some of the most sensitive Navy technologies that would take the Navy into the next century.
We know that he gave the Chinese government information regarding the Virginia-class submarine, which is our newest sub, and DDX information, which is our newest destroyer, most advanced destroyer in the world. But the most important thing we were worried about leaving Power Paragon was quiet electric drive, which is a technology that is devoted to quieting the acoustic signatures of Navy ships, and especially nuclear submarines.
A submarine is of no value if the adversary knows where it's at. Quiet electric drive would have given the Chinese a fingerprint for that sub's movement throughout the ocean and allowed them to track it and eventually destroy it.
If a foreign power knows the acoustic signature of a submarine, then they can kill that submarine. Quiet electric drive was at risk. It may have already gone to China or may soon go to China.
So that's why there's a much greater fear in failing to catch Chi-Mak.
In 2004, the Chinese didn't have a strong Navy capability. They were really a brownwater Navy, a Navy that was able to operate in shallow water. And so that Chi-Mak case shows the Chinese efforts to be able to expand their capabilities in the blue water.
If these technologies are lost, then it means we don't have that edge. So God forbid if there's ever a conflict in the Pacific that involves China, with us on the other side, then I believe lost technology will cost U.S. lives. And that's one of the things that makes me angry.
In the FBI, we have to follow principles, policies, and laws. And one of those is we have to have the evidence. Our greatest fear initially was, will we catch Chi-Mak doing what we thought he was already doing?
The thing that hit me hardest about this case was that we've got a man who came here for better opportunity and in fact was a spy, sent by China to come here, pledge allegiance to the United States. He took an oath with the full intention of betraying it. He lived in this country for decades and was willing to put in danger members of our military. There was a lot of pressure on all of us. I wanted to stop that leak. I wanted to stop Chi-Mak from providing any more information that would endanger U.S. Navy servicemen. That's why I wanted to catch him. And to protect our people. We decided to focus on Chi-Mak and his wife Rebecca because all of the indicators at work narrowed it down to Chi-Mak. He was the one who had access to the information that was being leaked to China.
We have to have the evidence. Our greatest fear initially was, will we catch Chi-Mak doing what we thought he was already doing?
Now, the allegation itself is not enough to be able to conduct a search warrant into a house or to monitor their telephone. So in the Chi-Mak investigation, we began by doing dumpster diving.
That's one method that doesn't give notice to the person we're investigating that we're involved. We look at it when they don't know we're looking at it. You're looking through trash that's been sitting there at least a week. usually in hot weather. There's maggots, there's smells, there's everything you can imagine. One of the ways that Gunner endeared himself to the others on the squad is he wasn't above doing the trash either, and he volunteered to go and help.
It's always funny to go home and my kids would ask me, how was your day? And I'd tell them I'd been dumpster diving all day, and it didn't sound like a real respectable profession, but that's what we do.
We realized that we needed to have 24/7 surveillance coverage of Chimak and his wife. We needed to understand where Chimak was, who his associates were, how he got from one place to another, where he went, and what he did when he went to those locations. In order to do that, you have to rely on just good old-fashioned physical surveillance.
Chimak's life revolved around his work. He didn't have a social life that we could see. He didn't even keep in much contact with his brother Timak, who also lived here in Los Angeles close to Chimak. Chimak would go home and he and his wife would spend long hours in there. Rebecca wouldn't leave the house without him.
Rebecca would look out her window every day and spend lots of time in the house. We felt that maybe she was protecting something. She didn't leave the house because she was guarding it.
Chimak and his wife lived extremely simple lives. They cut costs everywhere they could. Small home, never improved upon, about 700 square feet total, counting the garage.
Chimak made between $80,000 and $100,000. That's a fairly good living during that time frame. We would have discussions during the investigation about the fact that Chimak was a Maoist, and because of that, it dictated a frugal lifestyle.
Chi grew up in the time of the Cultural Revolution, a time when Chinese academics were looked down on, that the labor movement, the laborers were the ones that were going to forge the future.
That lifestyle was something that was ingrained into both Chi and Rebecca when they were raised in China.
As we would do surveillance of Chi, he would regularly pull into a gas station. And we thought he was doing counter-surveillance because he would wash the windows every time he got gas. And we felt that gave him a 360 view perspective of what was around him. In the end, in hindsight, he just didn't want to pay for a car wash. Chimak would travel every Saturday into a hardware store. So I made the opinion that he was meeting with a foreign intelligence officer in there. But that turned out not to be the case. What it turned out is when we actually put a body in there, that Chimak was cheap. The store gave him free coffee, and that's why I went every week.
Did you ever doubt that he was guilty?
Sure. From time to time, we'd doubt.
The investigation wasn't going well. I wasn't sure that we were on the right track. From the beginning of the case, we saw no communication between Chimak and anyone in China. But you have to be patient for your opportunity. If we push any more, we might reveal ourselves to Chimak. So it's a waiting game. We're waiting for the next time he steals information and tries to send it to China.
I believe Jim was under a lot of pressure. You have to remember, we were using a lot of manpower.
There were times when I thought, are we going to reach the end before someone pulls the plug? That the case wouldn't advance quickly enough and we would lose our resources and support. That worried me. At that point, I knew we needed to get a look inside his house. We had to develop the rest of the picture. After we started the trash and surveillance, we started writing up our affidavit for the FISA court.
The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act allows national security organizations to conduct surveillance to detect foreign governments spying on the United States or committing terrorism. It's a court, much like a criminal court. So in order to get the ability to monitor somebody's telephone, you have to have a warrant. And in it, it explains that I believe Chimak is committing espionage for the following reasons.
After 5 months on the case, we got authorization to tap his telephone lines and to go inside of his house and do a covert search. We were listening to every phone call that came in and out of that house.
Which led us to learn about a trip that he was taking to Alaska.
When we found out that Chimak and Rebecca were going to Alaska, I believe the first thought in everybody's mind was he must be going operational, potentially needing a handler to give information. That's very typical tradecraft for a spy.
So we took the safest course. We sent agents along with them who would watch them and make sure they didn't meet or pass any information to other people. And from what we could tell, they didn't pass any information. But the Alaskan cruise, that was our opportunity, I knew, to go inside his house covertly. We had to see what he had stored, who his contacts were, if he had any letters or correspondence with people in China. That was an important moment in the case, to get inside. This was our opportunity to go in and see what he had. After 5 months on the case, we got authorization to tap his telephone lines and to go inside of his house and do a covert search. Doing a covert or surreptitious entry into a home is a very complicated affair. It's not like the ninja movies you see.
There was a local park that we had set up the command post in. That was the brains of the operation. That's where it all was going to basically be coordinated from. And I remember pulling into the park and kind of taking in the visual scene. You had these majestic trees. I was the first one there. And I would be lying if I said that I wasn't nervous.
We had to be absolutely certain that we're able to get into the house, search the house, and get out of the house without being caught. In order to do that, we need to make sure that we really fit into the natural patterns of that neighborhood. The FBI went so far as to obtain a van that looked just like Chimak's van that we used to approach the home. The idea being if a neighbor were to look out, they would just assume that Chimak was coming home and would go back to sleep.
You need a huge number of people watching the neighborhood, making sure somebody doesn't walk up on you by accident. You've got to watch out for dogs and teenagers, as strange as it may sound. Teenagers can come and go at any time of the night, and the dogs can be barking. Neighbors get up to smoke on their porch or use the bathroom. So it's a very complicated ballet of controlling when you go in and when you leave. You can't just come and go.
I remember standing in the command post and taking stock of everything going on around me and then realizing just how complex this operation really was. All of the moving parts. Any one of those things fail and you're done.
When you go inside the house, you can't leave a trace that you've been there. For instance, if the coffee table's very dusty, you can't scoot something, because then you've left another trail in the dust that if they really know their house, they're going to come back and say, how did that thing get moved?
You know, literally there was dust on things, and the FBI would spray dust to replace the dust we'd moved so it couldn't be detected. You leave the room exactly how you left it. Pretty impressive.
When we went into Chimak's house, we were surprised at the amount of information that he had taken and stored in his home. This house was dense with documents. He had them stacked by the front door, on the kitchen table, in his bedroom, in his computer room, a second bedroom, all over the house. When I saw that much information in there, I felt validated. A lot of research, a lot of manpower had gone into this first entry into the house, and this was validation that, again, we were on to the right person, that we had a guy who was collecting information. And this is the information that we thought was at risk, that may have already gone to China or may soon go to China.
The search of the house confirmed he was stealing information, but we didn't have the proof that he was committing espionage, and that would include giving it to a foreign government. We could prove that he stole it, we could prove that he traveled, but we couldn't prove that he traveled with the classified documents. That was the next step. That was the smoking gun that we needed to go to the next level.
After the covert entry, the next big break happened when we recovered something from the trash.
We're looking through Chimak's trash for almost a year before we found any real high-value evidence.
Amongst the trash, we found a lot of tiny little pieces of paper with Chinese characters on them.
On that given day, Special Agent Jessie Murray from the FBI had in the office laid out a bunch of pieces of paper, and she was putting them together like a puzzle. And she called me over. She said, "Gunner, can you help me with this?" I remember making some joke about how I could read Chinese, but I caught the 3 letters at the bottom that said DDX, and I said, of course, that's about the Navy's next destroyer. We translated that note, and the note went from being a note to being a tasking list, which clearly demonstrated that Chimak was receiving guidance or direction to steal what he was stealing.
A tasking list is something that the handler, the foreign government, gives the individual and says, these are the technologies we want. And in his case, he received 2 lists. The other list was typed in Chinese, specifically telling him, collect this information on a disk, put it together, and then give it to us. We learned later that the tasking and the instruction sheets originated from Chimak's handler in China, Mr. Pu Pei Liang. The 2 sheets were delivered in an orange-yellow health book. Chimak opened up the book, and inside were these 2 lists. I thought at the time we were extremely fortunate that Chimak tore up a note that if he were stopping and thinking about it, he would have burned or shredded or disposed of in a way that we couldn't have found. Very little was ever in his trash. Bills, that sort of thing. To find that tasking list one time, that was one of the big mistakes he made. When I found those 2 lists, and I knew that we had a tasking list and a set of instructions, that validated the whole investigation up to that point. I knew nobody would question our investigation, that we were on the right track. And I knew going forward that would mean we would continue to get resources to take it to its logical conclusion.
We're looking through Chimak's trash for almost a year before we found any real high-value evidence.
Finding the trash with the tasking note and the instruction sheet was the most significant find we had, because it showed he was still spying for China.
Finding the tasking notes in his trash allowed us to use more obtrusive investigative tools.
During this investigation, Chimak and his wife took 3 vacations, which gave us opportunities to go into the home. The first opportunity, we went into the home and we saw all the paperwork that he had stacked up from work. The second opportunity we went in, we planted microphones in the house. The third time we went in is when we put the cameras in the house as well.
Installing closed-circuit television cameras was a challenge. You can imagine how well you know your own room. To be able to go in to that room and install something as invasive as the equipment needed to record closed-circuit TV, it's difficult.
We watched their daily life, what was going on at home, and how they dealt with each other as husband and wife was really unusual. We never saw an inkling of affection between them. There was no hand-holding, pat on the back, hug, kiss, none of that. That kind of relationship kind of made us wonder, is this actually a marriage in the ordinary sense, or is it more of a contract, more of a partnership, more of something that the Chinese government had put together to serve its own purpose? In our investigation, we also started following his brother, Tai Mac, his sister-in-law, Phuc Ly, and even his nephew, Billy Mac.
We knew that Tai Mac played a role because the surreptitious searches gave us information about who Tai Mac was and what his role was.
We believe that Tai Mac and his family were sent to the United States in 2001. Tai Mac's job was to be the courier of information that Chimak stole.
Tai Mac was an integral part of this operation.
Now that we had the list, we continue every technique that we've been using, waiting for the next time he steals information and tries to send it to China. But you have to be patient for your opportunity. You don't know if it's going to be next week, and you have to be ready for that, or it could be next year.
We received a phone call from the surveillance personnel that they had some video of Chimak and Rebecca sitting at the dining room table copying discs.
That was the day we knew, okay, big break, something is going on here. In the surveillance tape that we saw of Chimak and Rebecca making the discs, Chimak was making the discs, but Rebecca was constantly over his shoulders nagging him about what he was doing wrong or how he could do it better.
Then it was quickly discovered that, in fact, they were discussing copying discs and giving them to his brother, how they were going to take these discs back to China.
Based on information we had, we believe the quiet electric drive, the very sensitive Navy submarine data, is on that disc.
Timac then took that disc home and gave it to Billy, his son, who was in charge of the IBM ThinkPad laptop, which had the encryption program on it.
Timac wasn't so good at doing the encryption on his own. So we don't believe Billy was originally part of the plan, but Timac asked his son to help him encrypt the information that his uncle Chimak had given him. We found out that Phuc Lee had made some calls and then called her husband and said, we're going to China. The very next day, Timac called the handler, Pu Pei Liang, in China.
喂，你好，这是卜先生吗？是。蒲同志，这是麦先生，红花在南美，我要飞南航，会在30号早上6点20到达。
Pu Pei Liang was happy. He said, hey, when you land, call my cell phone number. It's a number we saw repeatedly throughout the case. And they hung up. Then a few days later, Tai calls his brother Chimak and says, brother, I'm going to China.
我下天嘅香港，朝香港，又去大陸。好啊。
We brief the head of Navy nuclear reactors, and he says the quiet electric drive can't leave the United States. You must stop it from leaving the United States.
QED was too sensitive and was the deciding factor that we had to make an arrest then.
Quite honestly, there was a lot of relief because we finally hit the stage in the investigation where, aha, we got him. We finally got him. And now we get to do something about it.
When we hear this whole series of events go on in the past week, we're very excited. Chimak has been stealing information that puts U.S. lives at risk, and we were going to stop him. We were going to finish with a complete case, a trial, and a conviction.
He compiled 3 disks of information onto one disk with the intention to give it to the Chinese government. And we believe the quiet electric drive, the very sensitive Navy submarine data, is on that disk.
Then a few days later, Tai calls his brother Chimak and says, brother, I'm going to China.
我下天嘅香港，朝香港，又去大陸。好啊。
That's what was the final straw to say we had to arrest now.
To complete the charge of espionage, we have to show the complete cycle, that you've stolen it and then you've transferred it to a foreign power. By watching Tai take the information and go through security, we're able to complete that charge that he is now committing espionage because he's flying to China in order to give it away.
The operation to arrest Timac and his wife at Los Angeles International Airport was extremely complicated.
It's not just taking down one person in one place. We had to do multiple arrests simultaneously. We were going to have to make sure we knew where Chi and Rebecca were, follow Billy, Tai, Phuc, all at the same time. Prior to the arrest of Tai and Phuc at the airport, we were doing heavy surveillance of them as they approached the airport. Billy drove them, dropped them off, and left. As they were at the airline counter, we had an outer ring of surveillance personnel who noticed an Asian male standing on the sidewalk at LAX outside, filming them through the window.
He's at an airport and he's videotaping people in line in front of him. Why would he do that?
We told that unit to stay on that unidentified man, and the inside unit would stay on Phuoc and Thai. They followed him through security. And then made the arrest.
And that went very, very smoothly, very quiet, not like TV, no guns fired, but a very, very, very quiet arrest.
What was interesting is that man watched the arrest, sat down, and started using his phone.
And he looked bewildered. He looked completely confused. And during that time, we're able to go through his telephone and learn more about him.
His name is Mr. Luo. He had 5 telephones on him, and he was texting people in China about his progress. This was frosting on the cake for us. We didn't realize that they would have surveillance personnel watching their own people for signs of compromise. And it also confirmed the importance of this delivery to China, that they would have somebody watching it.
At the airport, we searched the bag of Thai and Phuoc Ly, his wife. In the piece of luggage, they had a small book titled How to Speak American English. And in it, it had 2 out of 3 CDs. And they're the type of discs you'd learn to speak English. You put it in your computer, you'd spit out words, you'd talk back to it. And instead of having the 3rd disc, they had the disc that they copied and encrypted. Pretty ingenious if you think about it. Any inspector would open the book up, would look at it quickly, see the 2 discs, and move ahead.
When Thai Mac and Phuoc Ly entered through security at the right moment, all of the elements were in place to take them down, all coordinated at the same time with the exact moment of the arrest of Chi Mac and Rebecca at their house.
It was about 11:30 at night. We showed them the search warrant and the arrest warrant. We told them what they were under arrest for, and we transported them to the FBI office to be processed.
After following someone around for 2 years and getting to know them without ever speaking to them, it makes the first conversation quite an awkward one. Jim Gaylord and Gunnar Nyquist would finally hear from Chi Mac, his own mouth, what his story was.
I don't care you believe or not believe, I just tell you the fact, that's all.
Okay. Give me an explanation for why those 2 lists were in your trash and where they came from.
This one.
Okay, not a long one, just who belongs to these lists? Where do they come from?
And when Jim asked him the question about the list, he was shocked by it, so he started muttering whatever he could think of to deflect from us. A great moment is when he reads that tasking list and he grabs for a cup of tea that was been empty for 40 minutes, and he sucks it to his mouth just to give him more time to think about what his answer was going to be.
I pulled this out of your trash, and I put it together. This came out of your trash.
What is
Don't
trash?
Don't ask me like
Yes.
you didn't.
Yes.
Because I saw it. I did it.
Yeah, it's not. I never trash anything. Probably.
You tore up this note, so people would just see a lot of gibberish and wouldn't mind paying attention. But since I know what I'm looking for, I know what you're doing, we piece this together and we see instructions to you about how to do things from those people that you're helping back in China. You put it on a CD, it goes back to them.
Hard to explain how you would have such a list in your trash and then it'd be typed in Chinese.
Oh, of course, I can write something Chinese too. Now,
That's a typed Chinese script. You do not have that on your computer.
no, I don't have.
So where did it come from?
Very hard for Chi to explain. We thought we had him We really thought he was going to turn and talk to us at that point, but he didn't. He dug his feet in, and it was frustrating. It was frustrating because we knew that he knew we had him. We all knew that he was lying, and he just refused to open up. When I interviewed Chimak for the second time with Omar Lopez, another NCIS agent, I'll never forget walking into the jail, and Chi waved at me. Very unusual to see Chimak wave, and I really thought that the way our interview had ended 2 evenings earlier, that he would never want to talk to me again. But that day, he waved and he wanted to talk. So we brought him in, and we didn't really have a great plan for how we wanted to talk to Chi. We just started talking to him about the Navy and its technology, and we built rapport.
Chimak wanted to be the smartest man in the room. It was realized that Chimak wanted to be the professor. And so we, therefore, had to put ourselves into a position of being the student in order to get Chimak to open up. For Chimak, ego was the key to opening him up.
When we flattered him about the work he did, he wanted to talk more about it. And as he talked more about it, we talked about the significance it would have to China. And we asked, did you do it to help the Chinese? He said, absolutely. And then my response was, but wouldn't that also hurt the United States Navy? And he eventually came around and said, I guess you're right. I can't help China without hurting the United States Navy.
How come that conversation wasn't recorded?
Well, a lot of different reasons. The first reason was we were doing it at the Santa Ana prison. And when we went over there, we never expected him to talk. And it was not NCIS policy to record all of our interviews. And it just wasn't our method of operation. When Chimak finally confessed to me that he'd been passing sensitive information to China, part of me was delighted. This was a breakthrough. This is something we've been working at for a long period of time, and now he was telling me the truth. Part of me was angry, was pissed, because he was putting sailors into a really vulnerable position, only to satisfy his own ego, only to get the gratification of talking to people about the work he had done. He had no regard for these sailors' safety and security.
Once we made the arrest of Chimak and his family, then it was a waiting period. And it wasn't until a year and a half later that we went to trial. But we were going to dot every I and cross every T to make sure there were no gaps, nothing that could be taken advantage of to derail the case. Because then I'd feel guilt. Feel guilt for letting these people get away with what they did for decades.
An American engineer who worked for a defense contractor is now on trial. He's accused of stealing critical U.S. Navy technology for the Chinese government.
The trial went very smoothly from our end. We had excellent government witnesses as special matter experts, engineers as witnesses to what Chimak was doing, and of course a lot of agents took the stand, including myself, to testify about what we'd seen and what we'd recovered. In the end, Chimak was convicted of every single charge that was brought against him.
A victory today for federal prosecutors as a former defense industry engineer. Chimak was found guilty of conspiring to export U.S. defense technology to communist China.
When Chimak was found guilty, all of the faith that we had to put into this investigation from the very beginning was finally justified, finally paid off.
The conviction of Chimak on all charges by a jury of his peers was extremely satisfying to me. It was a huge win for the whole intelligence branch.
Once the decision had come out that she was guilty of the charges, the rest of the family came in on a plea deal. The Mack family was all charged together. All pled guilty to agent of a foreign government, international traffic in arms regulations, conspiracy, false official statements.
Chimak is currently serving a 24-plus year sentence in prison. The rest of the family has served out their sentence and have been deported to China.
She got a just sentence, and we learned a great deal about the Chinese methods of operation. The Mac case really demonstrates how the Chinese used family to commit espionage. In a family, you can trust one another. You know who they are. It allows them to have natural relationships. But the results of our investigation is we caught a family who was committing espionage. We caught a family of spies.
This ended up being a milestone case. It showed that we could convict people on these sorts of charges, and since then, across the country, we've been able to successfully charge and prosecute people for espionage and espionage-type crimes.
Mac stole sensitive Navy information and gave it to the Chinese government for over a decade.
The technology that Mac gave China significantly reduces the gap, the technological gap, between the United States Navy and the Chinese Navy.
A minor incident, the words of China's naval commander quoted in state media on Friday after top-level talks with the U.S. over the South China Sea. Beijing sounding off a warning to Washington after a U.S. warship sailed close to man-made islands claimed by Beijing this week. With only 55 vessels in Washington's Western Pacific Fleet, U.S. ships in the region are outnumbered more than 5-1 by China. For now, both sides have agreed to follow guidelines to avoid clashes. But beneath the diplomacy, tensions are simmering.
I'm certain that there are many other people like Mac in the United States working on behalf of China. Absolutely.
There are people in this country who are gathering defense information to take back home, to help their countries develop their own edge to compete in the United States.
Yes, there are a lot of people out there working on behalf of China.